research, I honestly didn't feel like there was anything more that I could bring to the table. I really can't top this article. So I've decided to just read it for you today, converting it into a more relaxing format, adding some commentary here and there. So sit back, relax, while we travel back 71 years to 1950. The article that I'm pulling up now and that I'm reading from today is from The Guardian, and it's titled The Baby Snatcher, a true crime tale of a child. That was my cat. Sorry. This article is titled The Baby Snatcher, a true crime tale of a child kidnapping. Written by Sarah Weinman, and it was posted online in 2017. The temperature hovered around the freezing mark on the night of March 30th, 1950. Chaneta Holden, 9 days old, lay in the incubator ward at Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx. Her parents, 26-year-old Clifford and 24-year-old Anna, were at their 6-room railroad flat on 131 West 116th Street in Harlem. Anna herself had only returned home from visiting the sleeping baby girl at 6:30 p.m., mere hours after her own hospital discharge. Chaneta's birth at City Hospital on Roosevelt Island had been difficult and premature. Anna recuperated there for more than a week. The baby, however, remained there a mere 12 hours. City Hospital didn't have incubators, and Lincoln's prenatal unit did. There, Chaneta could be kept warm, the temperature steady at 96 degrees Fahrenheit, breathing in the oxygen pumped into the apparatus. Chaneta weighed just 2 pounds and 11 ounces at her birth. Wow. The premature babies did not survive then at the rates when she drank, as she tended to do at least twice a week. Her temper could be explosive. Evelyn lost her job as a domestic and went on unemployment insurance. It seemed like a sign to leave Youngstown and try her luck in a bigger city. She moved to New York, March of 1949, probably already in the company of her common-law husband, Walter Jordan. He got a job as a porter at a mid-town hotel. She found work as a chambermaid. Over the next year, Evelyn's baby obsession deepened. She clipped articles from newspapers, stockpiled medical books on infant care, and learned everything she could about nursing. So what if she didn't have the qualifications? Her nursing gifts came from God. That made her better than all the other nurses. She would show them. But Evelyn continued to drink, to have seizures, and to lose control of her mood. She accused Walter of being involved with other women if his eyes lingered too long on another lady. She had trouble making friends. She shaved several years off her age and went around saying she was 18. And halfway into the first month of 1950, she found 2 clumps of blood in her undergarments, leading her to believe she had been pregnant and miscarried twins. Evelyn knew she was destined to be a mother. She knew she'd be so good at taking care of babies. She started loitering at hospitals all around New York just to catch a look at the newborns, her own maternal feelings roiling inside of her. Call it destiny, determination, or delusion, but something propelled her up to the Bronx the night of March 30th. The very night Chaneta vanished, another baby also disappeared. 6-month-old Diane Ramsey was snatched from her baby carriage in a Brooklyn movie theater lobby as her mother caught a double feature. The agonizing experience ended the following morning. Diane's abductor had probably mistaken the baby for a neighbor's. I'll never take her to a movie again. Never, cried Diane's mother, duly chastened and grateful for a happy ending. Can you imagine? The Holdens had no such happy ending to their ordeal on the morning of the 31st. Even worse, doctors did not believe Chaneta could survive outside the incubator for more than a day. Dr. Marcus Gogol, the city's commissioner of hospitals, short flights up from an entrance leading to 141st Street. Anyone with a mind and sense to track when nurses checked on babies and when they were not around could sneak in, snatch a baby, bundle it up, and leave without being spotted. But several witnesses spotted a woman that night. She was in her early 20s, hovering around 5 feet tall, 130 pounds. She wore a bright green Kelly coat, a white blouse, low-heeled Oxfords, and a red skirt, which she took off to wrap around the baby. Shivering under her coat, she boarded an elevated train at Southern Boulevard on 143rd Street, 4 blocks from the hospital, and drew the attention of the conductor. She wanted to know where to buy a blanket for the baby in her arms. He suggested she catch a cab near the 125th Street stop. The woman and baby got into the cab driven by 25-year-old Elmer Fuller. She first directed him to a store 2 blocks away where she rushed in to buy a blanket and some baby clothes. Back in the cab, the woman decided to put her red skirt back on over her slip and bundled the baby in the freshly acquired blanket. Fuller, seeing the woman's struggle from his rear-view mirror, suggested a further detour. The woman could change her skirt at the house of his friend, Beatrice Vernon, who lived on the corner of Madison Avenue, 135th Street. The woman agreed. Fuller pulled the cab to the front and opened the door. Vernon ushered the woman in, who shook and cried as she held the baby. "Do you think the baby is dead?" she asked Vernon, not once but twice. Both times Vernon said no. The baby seemed to be breathing nicely. Later, Vernon recalled the woman didn't even know how to hold the baby. Its head kept falling back Chaneta alive dimmed. The weather remained cold. She remained a premature baby in desperate need of consistently hot temperatures to keep living. Anna fell ill and had to be hospitalized again. Clifford quit the television repair classes and they had to make do from his monthly GI wages. More time passed without news of Chaneta. Never mind that there was Jerry, Chaneta's 6-year-old half-brother, to look after, and that awful apartment to maintain. Still, they could not believe that Chaneta was dead. They would not let that idea poison their minds. They spent the majority of their days glued to the radio on the slim chance of news. I won't hold anything against you, whoever you are, Anna pleaded publicly on April 8th. All I ask is the safe return of my baby. Beatrice Vernon had the radio on as she cleaned her Madison Avenue apartment. It was the night of Monday, April 24th. More than 3 weeks since Chaneta Holden vanished from the Lincoln Hospital. Please don't think I'm nosy, the voice on the radio warbled. I'm just as kind as I can be. Vernon liked what she heard. Where could she buy that record? She set aside her cleaning, grabbed a coat, and headed over to a dime store on 125th Street and 7th Avenue. Rummaging through, she found the record she wanted and asked the cashier to play it. As baby boy Warren crooned the lyrics to an accompanying piano and guitar, a woman approached Vernon from behind. "Oh, I like that record." Vernon turned around. It was the same woman who had come to her apartment weeks ago with the tiniest of babies. She had her hair combed differently and wore different glasses, but Vernon recognized her at once as the woman she now knew to be the kidnapper of Chaneta Holden. Vernon caught the attention of a policeman patrolling the street near the dime store. This is going to sound fantastic, I know, but there's a woman in the store who I'm certain is the same woman who took that incubator baby. The policeman told Beatrice to go back inside the 5 and dime and keep the woman in conversation. He also asked Beatrice if she was sure this was the woman that was the kidnapper. She hesitated. What if she was wrong? Vernon returned to the store. The woman was still there and seemed peeved. The salesgirl kept staring at me just because I have a long coat on and a dress. The woman went up to the counter. Then she saw the policeman. She fled the store and hailed a taxi. Vernon followed right away. She got the taxi's who said his name was Walter Jordan. At first, Evelyn denied there was a baby on the premises. Then she said the baby was theirs. Finally, after hours of questioning, she broke down and took them to a room across the corridor, even smaller than the couple's. What police saw there astonished them. Chaneta, a now 35 years old, was swaddled in an electric blanket located inside a carriage. A pan bubbled with hot water to keep the room sufficiently humid, while an electric heater made sure the room kept Chaneta properly warm at 96 degrees Fahrenheit. There were baby formulas, rubber gloves, books on child care, the medical text, new modern home physician, records of nursery rhymes such as Dink Donk Bell and Lucy Goosey Gander, blankets, thermometers, a piggy bank, a toy cat, and a rosary. Anything Chaneta touched was sterilized on an electric grill. Evelyn Jane Jordan had done everything right to keep a premature baby alive in what amounted to a minuscule closet, far removed from the sophistication of a hospital incubator. The city's hospital commissioner, Marcus Gogol, the same man who had been certain Chaneta could not survive more than a day outside the incubator, now said, "It was remarkable the baby was alive." Lincoln Hospital's superintendent, Bernard Nadell, went further. "It's an act of God." Chaneta Holden had not merely survived in the makeshift incubator at Coburg Hotel. She had gained half a pound, now weighing 3 pounds, 1 ounce. Late in the night, at about 2:30 a.m., police arrested Evelyn Jane Jordan and took her back to Lincoln Hospital to reenact the kidnapping. It turned out Evelyn's first visit to the hospital had been the night of March 30th. She had climbed the stairs to the second floor, unhooked the doors, and found herself at the incubator ward, all alone with 5 babies. She grabbed Chaneta, wrapped her skirt around the baby and the bundle under her coat, hurried out the side door, and walked 3 blocks to 143rd Street and Cypress Avenue to catch the subway, where began her adventure with the taxi driver, Elmer Fuller, and his helpful friend, Beatrice Vernon. While the entire city believed Evelyn had boarded a Greyhound bus to take Chaneta down south, she had merely exited the cab, gone across the street to the Coburg, and created a makeshift incubator for the baby. Evelyn told police she had spent upwards of $10 a week on supplies for Chaneta, and she told Walter she was taking care of a baby for a friend. If he argued, her temper became ferocious. Walter had learned not to argue. Before going to police headquarters to be booked on kidnapping charges, Evelyn asked to hold Chaneta one last time. Her wish was granted. "I can't help but feel bad for this woman. I know what she did is awful, but look how well she took care of the baby. What if this was just fate, and Chaneta would not have survived without Evelyn's help? The Holdens, shaken out of their stupor at 3 a.m., could not comprehend the good news at first. Their baby was alive, but once they saw Chaneta back safe at Lincoln Hospital, her identity confirmed through fingerprints and footprints, the news sank in. My heart gave a leap of joy, said Anna. I grabbed my husband's hand. He looked at me to say, "That's her all right." You see, I prayed. I cried many times. Even when I prayed, I had a fear in my heart. And as I prayed, if they found the baby alive, I knew it would be a miracle. Thank God, she's alive. Clifford, after taking a look at his daughter, told reporters, "She looked all right. I think she put on weight." As for Chaneta's kidnapper, "I feel sorry for her," Anna said. "Those 25 worrisome days, I can forget. You see, she took care of the baby. All the baby's things were kept so nice and clean. The baby is larger and in good health." While the Holdens displayed sympathy toward their daughter's abductor, Beatrice Vernon took a harder line about promise me you will do that? You promise me, and I will promise you. Then, when I see you again, I will send you home. Is that fair?" Evelyn nodded and said, "I promise you that." Evelyn was committed to Mattawayan State Hospital in Beacon, New York on June 14th, 1950. She remained there for more than 6 years. Over time, the anticonvulsive medication controlled her epilepsy, and her delusions faded away in 1952. Judge Barrett died in 1956, their mutual promise broken by ill health on both sides. On November 19th, 1956, Cassidy and Weiss finally judged Evelyn, now 32, to be sane. Instead of standing trial for Chaneta's kidnapping, she pleaded guilty a month later. She received a suspended sentence on the condition she never set